what Africans ended up doing in enslavement here was pulling off something very special. They ended up creating a new African culture. I'm going to go into that in a minute, founded on African principles with new additions. But one of the old principles that we drew from out of Africa and is basic to our souls and our heart was the mighty truth. A few weeks ago, I talked about the Bambara and for them, how lying was considered a moral leprosy. It was such a bad thing that they equated it with a disease that just emaciates a person, turns them into virtually nothing, strips them of their skin and everything else. And for them, lying was of that disorder. The African coming into the Americas, including the United States, came in with a great sense of integrity, which is at the heart of being human. But they came in conflict with a people, the Euro-American, in this case, the European and the Caribbean or South America, who came out of a different culture. Now, one of my specialties is European philosophy and history. Because as a warrior, you got to know your enemy. So I study them. It's not an enjoyable study, but it's a necessary study. And so what I found is when you look at the Aryan, who is the root of the European, I'll go into Aryan at another time. They came out of a culture, and it remains to this day, though it has a Christian coating on the top of it. When I say a Christian coating, Christianity is not a European religion. It's Hebrew. And so it's one grafted on to European culture. They've used it, but it is not at the core of their belief system, especially not New Testament, not Jesus, not turn the other cheek, not forgive your enemy, not love your neighbors. That is not where their culture is coming from. Their culture is teleological. What does that mean? Teleological means it's a use-oriented culture. If you study their culture, we have not studied anything other than white supremacy. And I don't use the term, by the way. You don't see me using the term white supremacy. The sister I had on the show a couple of weeks ago, Sister Kuja Chagalia, which a lot of you love, former student of mine, she doesn't use the term either. Why? For her, it's disempowering, white supremacy. It's a term they invented, by the way. But for me, it's inaccurate. Whites are in decline, supreme over what? When have they won a war? You know? The Cubans kicked their butt in the Bay of Pigs. The Vietnamese kicked their butt. The North Koreans ran them out of North Korea with the help of Mao Zedong. I was a brainwashed Marine in the Marine Reserves. I never did any fighting. It was before I woke up. And they called this a strategic withdrawal. This was a strategic behind kicking. Strategic withdrawal my butt. If two gangs meet and one runs, they got whipped. And when have you ever seen a boxer get in a ring and run? You hear me? At least he stands up and gets knocked out and threw a few punches, maybe, you know. So white supremacy, my behind. They ain't supreme anymore. In a few years, they won't be supreme in numbers in this country. And in a few years, China is going to be the foremost power. Asia today, Africa tomorrow, baby. You hear me? Billion Africans getting themselves together. So when we look at this enslavement system, we have to understand that the Africans came in with into conflict with a culture alien to their own. Whereas their culture was a culture founded on truth. The Aryan or European culture is teleological, it's use-oriented. And so what does this mean? The Greeks are considered to be the fount of Western civilization. A lot of us will stress the fact that Greek civilization is based on Kemetic or Egyptian, and that's true to a point. George James' book, Stolen Legacy, stresses this, but only to a point. Yes, Kemet had an influence on Greece, but fundamentally, the Greek is Aryan. And the Aryan, who now we call European, when they say good, they do not mean kind, right, honest, or just, or truthful. They mean whatever they've done that is good for them is good. So if they enslave you, it's good. In all Indo-Aryan or European languages, good has the same meaning. It means strong. And bad means weak. One reason why Trump is so appealing to whites is that he's in the embodiment of that. He just hasn't really developed his faculties. Because if he did, he might have had enough sense, even if he didn't have the compassion, to do something for this COVID-19 virus that's killing people off like flies. Because he had no compassion, doesn't listen. He just went on instincts. And as a result, we whipped him. But that is the nature of the Aryan or the Euro-American, is that power is the supreme thing. Power is good, weakness is bad. The African, on the other hand, has this idea that truth is the most important thing. In ancient Kemet, this was called Ma'at, harmony, balance, justice, right order, but its essence was truth. What did the Kemites say? Speak truth, do truth. That was the meaning of Ma'at. For the ancient Africans, and I've said this before, the notion of truth was to know the truth is to be the truth. That was the basis for African ethics or African morality. It's taught by almost every African mother and every African American mother, or African Caribbean, or African South. I don't care where you come from. The most important thing that most Black mothers will say about their children is that they're good children. That is the most important thing for them. They are good children. And so truth for us is measured in practice. It's walking your talk. That's what we respect the most. On the plantation, therefore, did we, and this is the essence of your humanity, because if you have honor, if you have a sense of righteousness, then you will be a special kind of human being. And for us, what's extraordinary is ordinary for Black people. It's ordinary for a Black person to take in a family member and raise them. It's normal for a Black person to take an extremely sick family member, and I referred to this before, Alzheimer's, the hardest illness to treat, and to take them in for years and wear their own health down while they do that. It's ordinary for us. It's extraordinary for other people. What I say about African culture and African American culture is that humanism is so strong, we could lose 90% of it and still have more than almost the rest of humanity, except for probably Native Americans, you know? And we have far from lost any 90%. Because if we look at the state of Africans at the end of enslavement, where we didn't have an acre or a mule or 2 pennies to rub together, we stuck together. And as Carter G. Woodson said, that if a former enslaved African met another that needed a quarter, and they only had a quarter, they would give them that last quarter. He said, we were sharing to a fault. My grandmother, and I know everybody has stories like this, who was poorer than a church mouse, had to work most of her life until my uncle took care of her and she didn't have to work anymore. Someone would come to her door. It could be white or black in need of food. She'd sit them down and fix them a good breakfast when she hardly had any food to eat herself. This is the humanity of our people. We have survived because of that. But the adherence to the truth is the key thing. On the plantation, that was what was called Himbi, the Himbi tradition. That means Himbi, whatever they believe. Himbi, a Muslim. Himbi, a healer. Himbi, what he thinks, what he believes. Himbi, the truth. So that Africans measured it that way. Contracts were sealed based on your word. Now you'd better have a contract in writing, notarized. I'm advising you of that. Don't go on anybody's word. You can't. You're in a word of, what do they say? Forked tongues. Say one thing and do another. On the plantation, the worst, most savage white person was the Christian enslaver, who would whip you while he's reading the Bible. You hear me? So we held on to this moral code. And I want to say this about Ma'at. For the Kemites, the ancient Egyptians, Ma'at described their ethos. Ethos is what's unique about you in the world. E-T-H-O-S, ethos. It's your bearing. When you see people coming out of a certain culture, you just know it by their bearing. I can tell a continental African from an African American. It's in their face. It's not the complexion. It's in their face. The culture's in their face. It's also in the way they walk. The African American has a walk. Have you ever noticed it? Especially the black man. Even Barack Obama's got him a walk. Surprised me. He got him a strut. You know what I mean? So ethos, for the Kemites, Ma'at was their ethos. Why? Because they're coming out of a great civilization. And it is a civilization that is highly spirit-based. That's the center of it. God-centered. Their astronomy, their astrophysics is based on figuring out the proper days for worshiping God. Or their physics, the noon, the idea that, you're coming out of this watery-like mass that has electromagnetic energy. That is quantum physics. This is coming out of their spirit system of origin. So for them to maintain a civilization, you got to be righteous. It doesn't mean they always were, but it means that was their essence. Whereas in America, the essence is power and money. It's a very different system and a very different ethos.